Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone for joining us and tuning in. So today we have Dr. Afshana Haq with us and Sheikh Joe Bradford. And today we will be discussing how to create quality in these times of quarantine. So being confined at home, we're constantly around our family members. Maybe we don't have personal space, and time is something that we're struggling to make the most out of. And families just in general, and I'm sure and I hope everyone can relate, that families are trying to navigate through this new normal that has become. And we're trying to facilitate an environment where families can be together and create time that is beneficial and fun. So we hopefully are here to help you guys manage your time and manage one another. So let's just kick it off. We kind of want to focus on how families can work together, how faith is involved. How do you keep your ties with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do you keep that strong? Especially during times of unprecedented uncertainty. And how do you keep your brain in check? How are you still mentally stable, emotionally stable? So let's just dive straight into family. So how can we give each other space to have quality family time, but how do we know when to have family time and when to have personal time? Dr. Afshana Haq, if you want to start and let us know, what is the value of personal time? What does that mean when you're constantly surrounded by people?
Yeah, absolutely. How a family is going to structure their lives and balance their personal versus family time is going to be unique for every single family. I mean, every family has their own structure, who they're living with in the household. Some families are more vulnerable to COVID than other families. And then depending on the number of children, the number of caregivers available, all of those different factors have to be taken into consideration when you're trying to build yourself a schedule. And I think that's key. Right now, we are all, it doesn't matter who you are, every single one of us has been affected by this pandemic. So depending on, what is happening, how your family is, what you've been working on and building has probably been disrupted and shattered. So it's really important to have an actual structured plan of how to move forward as we go through this pandemic. So restructuring your lives, building schedules, and when you're looking at those schedules, and I was just telling Shada earlier that I was reading this article, and what really stood out to me is how they were saying the one thing that we do have control over is how we are to think about this. We can feel hopeless and helpless, or we can choose to look at some of the positives, probably not a lot, even if it's a little bit, and to choose compassion and connection with each other. So especially in times like this when we're all so busy and you're having to juggle homeschooling the kids and working and trying to find time for yourselves and maintain your sanity, they said we can get into, and this is definitely true for me, into a go, 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 get it done mode. And if you're in that mode, of thinking, your children, your family members, when they start getting in the way, they become a source of tension, they become a source of conflict. And so balancing that getting things done mode with the compassion, with the connection, and realizing that's what we need to prioritize in our lives, because we're in this long haul. And if we're trying to get things done, it's not going to end or necessarily resolve any of the issues we're trying to tackle. So learning to take a break, whether that means it's turning towards your family members or whether that means you need a break for yourself. And again, not just family members as a whole being unique, but individuals are very unique in terms of their own needs for how much of a break they need and what a break looks like. For example, for me, I like going out, I like walking, I like connecting to nature. My husband likes to stay home. And so learning to either give each other that space or balancing that time with each other and being compassionate for everybody's individual and unique needs are some things to keep in mind as you're trying to build the structure and the schedule into our new lives that we're facing.
And you definitely begin to start learning more about yourself as you do that and more about the people that you're with 24/7. It's like I have a family of 7 and we're constantly with each other, and it's a lot. It's a lot of noise. It's a lot of just things going on constantly. And I'm just thankful for like 30 minutes that I can get in my room, right? Because that's like the time that I have for myself to sort of like relax and cool down. But definitely, I would say that in family, there's a lot of, I know like my parents sort of guilt trip me with the Islamic perspective, and they're kind of like, you should be good to your family, even if we're mean to you. So, Sheikh Joe Bradford, if you want to put in a little perspective on that, family is a really important topic in Islam, and it is, parents are held to the utmost respect. But during times like Dr. Afshan Haq said, there's tension. There is tension that's created. So how do you deal with that, sort of in a more faith perspective?
So Dr. Afshana pointed out a very good point of inculcating compassion into everything that we do. And I think one of the most underrated forms of compassion is self-compassion, is giving yourself the permission to step away from people. And there are two kind of fault lines that we trigger when we see a need for ourselves. Number one is we feel that we're doing something wrong by actually taking time for ourselves. Number two, we don't communicate effectively when we need to take that time away from ourselves. And so this reminds me of the hadith of Salman al-Farisi when he went to visit his brother Abu Darda, and he found Abu Darda's wife sitting on the steps of the home, and he said, how are you? How is Abu Darda? She said, MashaAllah, he's so great. He prays all night, he fasts all day. This is, a bit of a passive aggressive response from her, as to what he was doing. And when he went and assessed the situation, found that Abu Darda was not taking time for himself to support himself, was not taking time to be with his wife, to be with his family, was committed so much to acts of worship. He said to him, your Lord has a right over you, your soul has a right over you, yourself has a right over you, and your family has a right over you. So give everyone that has a right their right. Abu Darda wasn't sure about that. He goes to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, Sadaqa Salman. Salman told you the truth. And so I think in these times, it's important to understand that yes, family is extremely important, but you have to understand yourself. It can't be where you're completely secluded from everyone all the time, and it can't be where you're with them all the time. And I think that sometimes our mindsets can be skewed in one way. Maybe parents want us to be with them all the time, and as young people, it's important to understand that as your parents get older, they will want your companionship more, because they themselves find a fear in the uncertainty and a kind of loathing from impending loneliness later in life. So the reassurance that you give them is important, but you also have to take into consideration your own mental health and spiritual health. And so understanding that you're not wrong for wanting that alone time, but effectively communicating that in the family, I think, is what really has to be focused on. Having them understand that when I am by myself, it is not an act of disrespect to you, but it's an act of recharge so that I can be with you in a better way. There's no benefit in everybody being together if everybody's at each other's throats. So understanding your own rights and the rights of others has to bring about a balance that we strike between those two.
Right. So there's like this huge stress on communication, and I guess like something that, so I'm 21, so I consider myself a youth, and I have younger siblings, and there's like this intense connection with your phone and like social media, and like even when you're with family, you're just physically there, but not like mentally, not anything else with them.
Right.
And I think that also creates a disconnect in communication.
Yeah,
So
no
I
doubt.
mean, yeah. So how does like, or I guess like when social media is like a huge thing and like we can't go see our friends anymore, so it's like the only way we have of connecting with friends is through our phones, FaceTiming, Zoom, doing Zoom meetings or whatever it may be. But how does that affect family time? How does that affect, like, where is that when it comes to personal time, family time? How does that interfere with it? And that's up to whoever wants to answer that. Feel free.
I'll
I
go
mean,
ahead. Oh,
go ahead. Yeah. Please.
okay. So, with all the different times that we're trying to balance, whether it's with the law, with our family, with our
Friends, with ourselves, it's important that when we create these boundaries, they're protected time. So that all of this time, and it's quality, not quantity, right? So if you have protected time with the family, don't be chatting with your friends while you're supposed to be with your family. The same way you're not going to be chatting with your mom when you're with your friends, in terms of whatever you're doing, however it is that you're connecting with them. And like, if you're not, I mean, the pandemic is triggering anxieties, stress, depression. And so we're going to find all kinds of different ways to cope with these. And being connected to your phone all the time, it is a source of relief because you're getting dopamine rushes every time you see a like, a ding, an email. So also to be mindful of that, having using technology in the phone and connecting with your friends in the way that it is beneficial, but also being careful in not allowing that to take over your life. By again establishing protected time frames. So if you're with your family, perhaps a rule can be, hey, it's going to be family time for the next 30 minutes or 15 minutes, wherever you need to start. Everybody put your phones away in this basket. And if you as a parent are going to make this rule, make sure you're following it too. I have a lot of parents telling their kids to get off screen, but they're still scrolling on their phone, either looking up latest pandemic statistics. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're trying to find out, but to model that for your children. So putting that phone away, really being present, really being connected with each other, and then even with yourself. If you're making time for yourself, but mindlessly scrolling through media and you're not really re-energizing in a way that is helpful, that's also wasted time. And if we're piling up on a bunch of wasted time, then it's going to be really difficult to emotionally regulate and to be really present when we're trying to connect with family or friends, or again, with ourselves or Allah.
Sheikh Joe Bradford, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that one of the things that we will actually exclaim on the day of judgment, and actually feel bad about, will be the wasted time that we have. Ya hasratana ala ma farratna fi jambillah. Woe to us for the time that we wasted that could have been spent on the side of Allah. And so it's being intentional. And I think not only just being intentional, but being positively and effectively intentional is super important. So it's not just about put the phone away and stare at each other in the face, right? But I would say, put the phone away and then have an activity, whether that be a card game, a board game, whether it be just ask an elder in the family, tell us about your life. I can guarantee you that so many of us know so little about our parents and our grandparents and their story. And so, having calculated, focused time where we learn to communicate, or we get our parents to open up by us being inquisitive about them. It can be very effective in them then being open to giving us our own time and allowing us time with our friends. So I see it as very much reciprocal.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I have to shout out my younger brothers, although they're probably not watching, but they do. They love playing board games, and they love just like kind of making sure that no one is on their phone when we're like playing Monopoly, or like, so that it's just like you do kind of take a break from this world that's like constantly moving, because your cell phone is a world, in my opinion, that's just literally constantly moving. It's nonstop. So taking a break from that and kind of focusing on reality and focusing on what's happening now is definitely, I think that's super cool. But I definitely would agree with all of that what's said, and it's super important to have that, especially with teens and parents. Sometimes it feels like there's a huge disconnect between them, and they blame it on generation differences, and maybe that is a factor, but there is also miscommunication, which leads to just a further barrier between them. But I do want to touch on what Dr. Afshana said when she brought up that these times in quarantine bring more anxiety, more depression, things like that. And people start to sort of question their faith, question like, what is happening here? Like, why has Allah put us in this situation? Maybe they can't go to the masajid anymore, so they lose like that physical tie with the masjid and that physical tie that they have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And maybe watching a lot of lectures online gets boring. You don't want to be on your computer all day. So how do people deal with that? How do you sort of stop yourself from thinking into another religion? Like, how do you stop yourself from that?
Well, I would say that the more important question is not, why did Allah do this to me? It's, what is He teaching me through this? So one form of question, we make ourselves a victim of what Allah has willed. The other, we make ourselves an instrument of what Allah has willed. We can choose to be effective in so many different ways. And I think that, one of the biggest lessons that we as Muslims, I know personally, this is one thing that I feel has been a benefit of just the idea of quarantine, is just gauging yourself and how truly spiritual are you when you don't have others around to push you towards that spirituality. Meaning that a lot of our spirituality was very much community focused. And I think this past Ramadan, and then this past Hajj, it was a challenge for many of us because we're used to very communal events. And, instead of saying, why am I not around, others, which, I was talking with a friend, who had converted some years ago. Someone had said, I don't know how I'm going to deal with Eid, and I'm just not around, just not being able to be around everybody. And she said, yeah, it's like that meme where the guy, has a noose on his neck. It's his first time. For many people, that's an ongoing reality. But I think, more than just saying, this is horrible, why did it happen? Okay, this is happening. What am I being charged with to do? What am I being what am I being taught through this moment? And perhaps one of the things that we're being taught is to really improve internally before we go back out, so that we can have that energy to go back out. Many of us might be saying to yourselves, what? I probably wasn't as frequent with community events, with going to the masjid, with being involved, with even caring for others before all of this happened. So now we should be developing a more acute sense of self-care and care for others, and preparing for when this passes, to go back out and to make the most of that. So again, not focusing on us being the victim of what Allah has destined, but being the instruments of what Allah has destined. The ones that we're not just waiting to receive mercy, but we're also there being conduits of mercy to others. And that's by organizing our time and being effective in the best way possible in the situation that we're in.
And when we're talking about opportunities, especially in terms of our deen, working on or having that opportunity to actually focus on your personal relationship with Allah. There's so many things in the world, and even as Sheikh Joe said, in terms of being distracted by the community, do we have that connection with Allah, a chance to strengthen our connection with Allah, really have conversations with Him, our dua, having it be more meaningful, and just sort of having that second level sort of connection with Allah that we now have so much more of an opportunity to do. And I found just friends and family about how Ramadan was so much more sort of spiritually uplifting because they did have more of the opportunity to do so. And so thinking about it in those terms as well, in order to, you know, instead of watching YouTube, but really taking the initiative to establish that connection on your own.
Yeah, so my dad calls it a blessing in disguise, that we are at home especially during Ramadan, when it's the holy month, it's a blessed month. So it's a time where people can really be one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they don't have those distractions of being all night at the masjid for Taraweeh, or like having iftar at a friend's house and missing Taraweeh perhaps. So that it is more of like a controlled environment because you're just at your home, and you have to focus on yourself and focus how you can strengthen your deen and your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are ways, maybe both of you guys can pitch in on this, but what are ways that maybe you guys have tried to strengthen your deen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of quarantine and being by yourself? Or how have you advised maybe your kids or someone that you know? What are ways that you guys would suggest to someone to do that?
Well, I think number one is understanding what does it mean to be connected to deen? What does it mean to be religious? What does it mean to be spiritual? I think that a lot of times our quests for spirituality and religiosity and connection to deen, quote unquote, are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. We have a certain experience or a certain emotional reaction in ourselves that we're looking for, and if that's not created, then we've let ourselves down. And if it is, then we feel, even though we might actually not be doing anything meaningful religiously. And so what I advocate for is to commit to the process and wait for the outcome. A lot of times people want the outcome. They want to feel good. They want the upliftment, but they don't want to put in the work that goes before that. And so, look for the blessings in the very small things that you have. And that is just in starting with those things that Allah has obligated you to do. In the Hadith Qudsi, the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah said, "My slave never comes closer to me with anything more beloved to me than the things that I've obligated him to do. And he continues to come close to me through the things that are optional until I love him. And when I love him, then I become his eyes through which he sees, his ears through which he hears, his hands by which he grasps, his feet by which he walks. If he asks me, I would give him. If he were to seek refuge with me, then I would give him refuge." Meaning that the meaning in our lives is transformed through these, what we many times see as very basic actions. So, have a message. I know a family here in Sugarland, mashallah. They basically turned a room in their house into a masjid, and they gather together and they pray their 5 daily prayers there. They read Quran together. They remind each other. They have a small Jumu'ah there even. And it's the small, consistent things of the process of just being Muslim that brings about the outcome, the greater spiritual understanding, as opposed to large community events, right? Which are important, but as I said before, perhaps this time is to actually take us back down to the very basic fundamentals of our faith and have us rebuild from there. And so, being constant in your prayers, learning and applying little bits of information, practical things, to me, much more effective than everything else that one could be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add on to what Joe was saying, like going back to the basics and in Salah, for example, or when we're, as I was talking about earlier about establishing that relationship with Allah, if you and your partner or your children or anybody, if you were speaking different languages to each other and you didn't know what you were saying, you wouldn't have much of a connection. So if we're praying our salat, going back to the basics in terms of really understanding what you're saying, as you stand before your creator. And if you're making dua, not just sort of regurgitating duas that you may have learned that you don't entirely understand, but putting it into your own words. And when you build on that connection, also thinking about what are you willing to do to establish that connection with Allah? Yes, making dua for it, but also are you willing to sacrifice some of your sleep to wake up during the Hajj time maybe, and really having no distractions because most people aren't awake, capitalizing on that alone time with Allah. And the more you start finding yourself doing in the path of Allah, the more you will find that Allah will be bringing you closer to Him as well. If my servant, I'm sure Joe can quote it better than I can, walks to me, I will run to him. So, focusing on, or, thinking about where you are, like with any goal that we try to establish, right? Assessing where I'm at and then figuring out where you want to be, and really understanding what you're willing to do to get there. And this is a great time to really, again, establish those formal plans and assessments in your life.
And it's also a great time, I would think, that it's a good, it like creates room for that connection between families as well. Mm-hmm. So if it's like a teenager that's not really, making salah on time, or like struggles to read the Quran or something like that, then that's like, I feel like that's a perfect way and a perfect time to sort of turn to a parent for help, or turn to a sibling or a family member that can sort of help you in the right direction. So, especially people that have younger siblings that maybe don't know how to write Arabic yet, or don't, something like that. It's just, I feel like it's a good way to connect sort of family and faith together, where you are praying jama'ah, like together. You are making sure that you're praying Dhuhr all the time. You're praying Maghrib right after. So there's you create a schedule, and I think you guys both mentioned this earlier, create a schedule for times when you guys can be together, and you make sure you pray Asr and that's it. And maybe afterwards you play, I don't know, a board game or something of the sort. But definitely being able to structure your day, maybe, I guess, structuring your day around salah is a good gauge for timing and a good gauge for when you can take a nap or whatever. What do you guys think about that? Just, connecting the two, making sure that you're not struggling with your faith by yourself.
Right, and this is a time where we can really connect with our children,
or we can push them away. As parents, we have a tendency to criticize our children with all great intentions. Of course, we want them to be better. But when they're praying salah with you, if at the end of salah, you're like, you know what, should have put your hands here, or, why did you move around so much? And don't hit your brother, don't hit your sister. And that's all great. But maybe starting out with, you know what, mashallah, Ruhi, I really love it when you pray with me. It warms my heart to see that you're praying. So thank you so much for praying. You could have done anything else. Complimenting them, helping them feel connected to you. Doing dhikr together. If my daughter can associate prayer with holding, my hand and feeling comforted by her mother, instead of associating prayer with criticisms by her mother or criticisms by her father, when she leaves the house, that's what they carry with them. And so remember to focus, it's that Oreo cookie method, right? You deliver something nice first, very gentle criticism if needed, and then ending it with another positive, that was great. Work on this a little bit, but you know what? It was awesome that you even increase the motivation for wanting to do these actions with you.
Absolutely, I completely concur. I think that's the more that you can, Dr. Afshana, you talked earlier. Maybe you can even tell us a little bit more about it. You said the social media gives us a dopamine rush, right? Are there other ways that we can get that same effect, but from not being on our phones, but from positive interactions with others?
Yeah. So there's multiple different endorphins you can get from different activities that we engage in. One of the most powerful ones is actually oxytocin. And that you only get, it's the cuddling hormone that you get from even sometimes talking with a friend, or, when a mother breastfeeds her child, hugging, touching, being close. We don't want to do that with too many people during quarantine, right? But with your family members, of course. I always think about in Salah, and, we're commanded to pray in Jama'ah, right? Shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot. You're touching, even if you don't know who that person is, even they're a complete stranger. But those are the cuddling hormones. And when we have more of these hormones in our life, we are actually healthier individuals. We live longer. We decrease chances of heart attacks. Other ways to get dopamine rushes, any kind of positive reinforcement. If you say, hey, every time you read an ayah or memorize an ayah, you get a sticker. Yay! That is trying to motivate our children that way. Other sorts of endorphins we get from exercise. So, a lot more people have been going out because they're sick and tired of sitting home all day, which is great. So running, exercising, moving, things of that nature will also give you those sorts of rushes, I guess.
So it's sort of like it's sort of like connecting yourself back to nature, like back to just like people, because there has been like it felt like a few years where people just like stopped meeting and just like relied heavily on technology to have those interactions. But now it's sort of like coming back to face-to-face things, or not necessarily too much face-to-face things, but maybe like you mentioned, Dr. Afshana, taking walks, going with your family on a walk, maybe taking a walk before Fajr or when there's a sunset. I feel like people like those kind of vibes and those aesthetics where you're right before the sun rises or right as the sun is setting. That's when it's kind of, cooler, and you can take walks and you can release stress and things of that sort. And just for speaking on releasing stress, a lot of people do, I'm sure we can all relate to this. There is a heightened amount of tension, a heightened amount of stress, being at home all day because you're sort of bored out of your mind. It's like you've rearranged your bookshelf 3 times already. Do you do it a 4th time or not? So there is a lot of tension and there's a lot of stress, and people are maybe forgetting to take care of themselves mentally and emotionally as well. What are ways to cool down from that? What are ways to release that stress? Or how can you be more aware of your mental health and your emotional health? Because I feel like many people might try to ignore it or pretend like it doesn't exist and just say, I'm fine. So what are ways to acknowledge it, or how do you acknowledge it, and what do you do after you acknowledge that? Dr. Afshana or Sheikh Joe, whoever wants to take that on.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. So if you're noticing that you're a little bit more agitated, you're yelling at the kids, you're exploding, you're just feeling negative all the time, you're in this negative state of mind, then something's not right. And again, for different people, it's different things. If you know what relaxes you, go do that. For some people it is reading Quran, doing dhikr. For some people it's watching a funny video, or going outside, standing in the sun. Nutrition is also very important. Sometimes we need to cope with chocolate cake and popcorn, and every now and then that's okay. But if we're doing that on a regular basis, you ultimately, your hormones are all kinds of imbalance. You're not doing well. You're going to end up throwing yourself into a depression. And so exercising regularly, staying healthy, that will take off a lot of the edge. Making sure you're taking a break. We are in the society that says the more you do, the more valuable you are. We're trying to be really productive. We're trying to keep our houses clean. But I think acceptance is a huge piece too. It's like, your house is going to be a little messy. Your kids may not make straight A's. They may not be learning everything you wanted them to learn. But reminding yourself that we are in a pandemic, and that is a really big deal. To acknowledge that. Also, most of us live in cultures where emotions are not okay. Weakness is not okay. Or not being completely okay and happy is considered a weakness, but we're human beings. We have highs, we have lows, and all of that is okay because that's what makes us human. If we're not feeling right, it means something in our environment is not right, and we need to do something to take a step back to reassess what's happening to us and to learn to listen to those feelings. It's like, okay, I'm agitated. Let me take a step back. What's going on with me? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I feeling sad? Okay, I think I'm a little bit sad. Why is that? You know what? I missed my graduation. I haven't seen my friends. I haven't done this. I haven't done that. And just to sort of sit with those feelings and relax and take a break so that you're giving your body permission to feel. And at the time, sometimes we don't even know. We don't know how to relax anymore. We don't know what makes us happy. Sitting back and make a list of things. I do this with my clients all the time. Like, what makes you happy? They're like, I don't know. I'm like, all right, well, when was the last time you were happy? What were some of the things you were doing? Oh, I used to rollerblade every day. Or I used to read these books and I haven't read them in years. Going back to some of those things. So these are all some suggestions on how to bring balance into your emotional health.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. One of the in my financial planning practice, one of the things that I have my clients do is take out a piece of paper and write down everything they do from 5:30 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. Typical day. And just fill it out, and then flip it. Take another piece of paper, and then write your ideal day, what you wish you were doing, what the best, most amazing day would look like, and then put them next to each other. And then draw, you're going to see that a lot of the things that are part of your best, most amazing day are things that you're not prevented from doing due to financial constraints or social constraints, but they're simply issues of mindset. They're behavioral issues. And so learning to focus on those can drastically improve the quality of time that you spend with yourself and with others, rather than obsessing about, I can't go outside, or I don't have enough money, or I don't have access to these resources. And a lot of times it's really important just to break things down granularly and understand where do I stand with everything that I have access to? Am I making the most of the resources that I do have access to? And what are, and how is that going to propel me forward to a better future for myself and for others? In doing that, it allows us to see that, while things might feel difficult, and they may very well be difficult, there is a way, and with every difficulty comes an ease. And in fact, with every difficulty comes two ease, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّمَا الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. So, going through exercises like that can be, super helpful in allowing to reorient our mindset and where we sit vis-a-vis, our goals and our mental health. Now, because we're talking about, youth, and Shada, you said, you're 21, you consider yourself a youth, right? So I always joke and say, we have a very broad operational definition of youth in the Muslim community. It's basically anyone between the ages of 4 and 40 as a youth, and I think what's important is to realize that we have such amazing ability to achieve so much earlier in life that we should not curtail it or cut ourselves short. I was watching a movie the other day. It's called The Current War. It's about the war over AC and DC current by Thomas Edison, Samuel Westinghouse, Nikola Tesla. Excellent movie. Benedict Cumberbatch, Tom Holland, a star-studded cast, very well done. It's on Amazon Prime if you're wondering. And the amazing thing is that Tom Holland plays Thomas Edison's assistant, and he goes and he bids on the Chicago World's Fair for them to light up the Chicago World's Fair with electricity for the first time. And as he's walking into the room, they announce him as the vice president of the company. As he's walking into the room, someone says, "This guy's only 12 years old." So in real life, this guy was a vice president of a company representing like a major bid at 12 years old. He had, much more potential than we would give an average 12-year-old today. So we have an infantilizing, idea of what it means to be a youth. We hold ourselves back many times from achieving our potential because we think we're not old enough yet. There's not enough, there. When in reality, if we truly took advantage of the resources that we have for creating businesses, for being proactive, for being volunteers, for improving ourselves, there's so much more that could be done without having to, hold yourself back by a label due to your age. And I would just encourage everybody to just go out and do it. Go out and apply yourself and become what you feel you can become. Because, there's a Elon Musk quote where he says, if you got a 10-year plan, try to achieve it in 6 months. Even if you won't achieve that 10-year plan in 6 months, you'll be far more ahead than the guy who tried to wait for 10 years. So, taking advantage of the time that you have and not curtailing or holding yourself back because you're too young, I think is one of the best things that you can do at this time.
And I think that's a really cool point, Sheikh Joe, because especially not only with age, but maybe because of COVID, there might be an assumption of like limited opportunity. You maybe won't get that internship that you've been dreaming of or the job that you really want. But opportunity is still out there for people, and it's still out there for youth, and for anyone really, but it is definitely there. And it's that mindset, like you mentioned, that limits us from going towards those, from running towards places that can give us more than what we think we can do.
I was speaking to a friend of mine's daughter the other day who is in rotations right now after med school. And she was like, oh, it's all telemedicine. We're doing it online. It's not really what we're doing, right? I said, well, what do you think about it? She said, well, it's not really what rotations were, but telemedicine is a reality now. So I feel that I have a head start on so many other doctors out there, right? So a lot of it's all about perspective. You didn't get that internship that you wanted, contact them and ask them if you can do a virtual internship. What greater thing could be where you're actually getting the credit for the internship and you're sitting at home on Zoom? Why not? Applying for, that's what I tell people about applying for jobs all the time. They say, oh, the job says, you have to have 3 years experience, 5 years experience, 10 years experience. If you feel you're qualified for something, people love to hear you reach out to them and just say, hey, I feel I'm qualified. If I can I do this remotely? Can I do it under the circumstances? If not, are there any other alternatives that you have for me? Be the person that puts the first foot forward and doesn't allow anything to stop them. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ista'in billahi wa la ta'jaz. Seek help from Allah. Don't incapacitate yourself. And a lot of times what we do is we stop ourselves because we think we know what the answer is going to be. Whether that be with dealing with our parents, dealing with jobs, dealing with school. We think, oh, they're going to say no. And in reality, that's just that's something we've told ourselves in our mind, but that's not what is necessarily there in what Allah has destined. And so, as no one's tied your hands or shackled your feet, or stopped you from sending that email, go ahead and do it. Because the worst that they can say is no. The best that they can say is yes. Even better, they can give you alternatives that allows you to not have, a huge, empty space in your resume, empty space in your activities. You can show that I was proactive during the time of quarantine on building something that was meaningful to me, rather than, yeah, I did finish several binge series on Netflix. Not that that's a bad thing. I do it myself, but that's not the only thing that we can achieve. We can achieve a lot even during the circumstances. If you can adapt to work and life and study now, but it's at its most difficult, then where you can go after this is endless, and by the permission of Allah.
Yeah, and Dr. Afshana, actually, I'd like for you to add. I mean, that was beautiful, Joe, Sheikh Joe. Thank you. And Dr. Afshana, I'd just like for you to add a little bit as to just to sort of emphasize on what Sheikh Joe was saying, and that like pushing yourself to those opportunities and sort of realizing that you are more than what you think you are, and the quarantine gives you that time to sort of focus on yourself and be able to push yourself in that direction and to learn more about who you are.
Right, absolutely. I 100% agree. Do everything you can in your power. Not necessarily taking a passive role, but being proactive about reaching the goals that you want, believing in yourself, and also being very creative. As you mentioned, it's not just about, waiting for a physical internship. Think about all of the different ways and the technologies, and maybe, really thinking outside of the box. And that really shows, CEOs and bosses or whatnot that, hey, you're flexible, adjustable, adaptable, and those are all qualities that people look for in an employee. But also I wanted to address the other side of that. So let's say you've done everything in your power. Also, again, working on that trust in Allah. If this is not the time for you, if there are other things that Allah has destined for you to work on, and maybe you'll take advantage of that as well. I mean, there's our productive lives, our work lives, and our personal lives, and all of that needs to be in balance. So, taking a step back could be the best gift that we can give to ourselves right now. And if you've done everything in your power and you're finding you're still sort of in this holding space, it can be very anxiety provoking when you're uncertain about which way your future is going. And I also wanted to turn to maybe more severe sort of mental health. A lot of people, unfortunately, we've heard instances of people taking their lives because they're having difficulty coping with some of the losses that they've experienced. People trying to get married and they can't, and just understanding that it's okay. It's okay for our plans not to work out. We plan and Allah plans. So having in His plan for us, times if it's not going to give you that comfort, reaching out to professionals. So many people are doing online sessions, even if it's not in person. It's not as bad as you think. I remember a long time ago, I never wanted to do it, but my practice is fully online right now. So reaching out to professionals, not just me, there's a wide variety of professionals out there, or just anybody, a friend even, people like, some people say, I don't want to burden anybody with my problems. A lot of people feel like, I'm so glad that you would turn to me. They think, wow, they must think I know something, so don't be afraid to reach out. That's so important. I'm feeling depressed and anxious in isolation. Again, in terms of being productive or getting a job, it's not more about focusing on yourself, focusing on your relationships, focusing on mental health. I'm not falling behind if you're, on medications or whatnot. There are also alternative sources of dealing with mental health. There's something called System. I don't sell those or anything, but they're just things that have worked really well, not only for myself, but for some of my clients. There's something called neurofeedback. There's lots of options out there for taking care of your mental health, especially if it's, it's becoming unmanageable for you.
Definitely. And so for the last 10 minutes or so that we have, I do want to address some questions that were brought up beforehand by some of our viewers. So this question actually is directed towards Dr. Afshana. How can you keep your sanity in quarantine? How do you stop yourself from completely going insane?
Me personally, or
yes,
people generally?
I mean, I'm sure
yeah.
If Sheikh Joe has something to say, I'm sure the person won't be mad about it. But go ahead, Dr. Afshana.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, well, I meant my personal sanity or sanity in general. Personally, and I want to be really real and human about this, I do lose my mind from time to time. And as a mental health professional, I don't necessarily have everything together. None of us do. And it's okay. Sometimes we need to fall apart so that we can get back up again. When you're down on the ground, the only way to go is up. And if you need a binge on popcorn and ice cream and brownies, whatever, from time to time, it's okay. You need one day of that break. Then really, after you've allowed yourself to fall apart, it's easier to strengthen yourself again. But if you're constantly trying to barely make it, that's a lot of energy that you're creating with you. You're not making room for your cup to be filled up with that stress again. Pour it out every now and then, the way you need to, exercise, talk to somebody, go out, whatever it is, in a safe way, of course, whatever it is that you need to do. I know I have a lot of my clients saying, my parents are driving me crazy, but they say I have to be there for him at, at all points. It is going to be difficult to mark your boundaries and to take the time that you need for yourself. I appreciate that difficulty. The only thing I can say is being as respectful as possible. Like, mom, dad, about whatever you call them. I love you and I want to be there for you. I really need some time for myself. This has nothing to do with you. I'm going to go take it and I will come back. You can ask for those things. Hopefully maybe this talk will take some of the guilt out of it. Even Sheikh Joe has emphasized you need that. There's, Allah has sanctioned time for yourself. And so saying, Sheikh Joe said I can do this. So don't be mad, mom and dad. Afshana said that too. It's something that I need for my mental health. Even if people are not okay with your boundaries, you can do it in a respectful manner and still get what you need. Maybe negotiating time. It's like, okay, you can't have 3 days to yourself. Maybe your parents are okay with a day or two or a couple of hours, whatever. But I find that when you negotiate your boundaries, when it has to do with other loved ones, you have more likely chance of getting the time that you need for yourself, rather than being an all or nothing. Like, I'm going to be with you 24/7, then I'm going to just disappear for a week because I can't take it anymore. Balance, being consistent, all of these will help you, inshallah. And again, making that schedule, and trying to follow the schedule to the best of your ability. And if you can, again, at the end of the day, a lot of self-compassion, and again, prioritizing connection to whatever it is that might help you feel better.
Okay, so I do want to move on to the next question. And it comes from a parent asking, how do you speak to adult children in a way so that they don't feel that you're criticizing them? And I think Sheikh Joe Bradford, you could take this question. So again, how do you speak to adult children in a way that they don't feel like you're attacking them and criticizing them for the way that they are?
When you speak to adult children, I think the first important thing is that if you have adult children or you are an adult child, that number one, if you have adult children, you recognize that they are adults. I have told my own children, I have 4 children who are adults, 2 that are not, and I have told them that you will always be my son, you will always be my daughter, but you will not always be my child. You will grow up one day and there will be expectations of you. And then you simply, this is the expectation, this is what I would prefer you do. And then after that, it's on you. A lot of times as parents, we kill ourselves over our children not doing exactly what we expected of them. And that causes like emotional turmoil and upset and, anxiety and all of that. And then also for the children, it's like, am I living up to what my parents had wanted for me? That causes another, another bout of anxiety. So you should be, as a child, even if you're an adult, as a son, as a daughter, you should be trying to do what's pleasing to your parents with regards to their needs, their personal needs. You don't have to sacrifice or forfeit your own personal needs for your parents, right? It's like, Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said, it's impermissible to force someone to eat food that they don't like. So how is it permissible for a parent to force a child to do something that is not beneficial for them? So the benefit that comes from listening to parents, speaking to one, in the parent-child dynamic, is in what is, what we see as most beneficial for our children, and giving them that advice and allowing them, because there's a cutoff. There's a lot of people nowadays, a lot of young people, and I know, because I lived like this before. You blame your parents for everything. My parents could have done more. They should have done more. They didn't do more. They didn't prepare me. Guess what? You're an adult now. Doesn't matter. You can blame your mom and dad as long as you want. It doesn't matter. You're an adult now. You've got to take responsibility. Parents do the same thing. I could have done more. I should have done more. I didn't do more. I should have told them this. Guess what? They're adults now. They're going to make their own decisions. And so understanding when the shift happens is key to talking to your children. So understanding, I'm not responsible for them in front of Allah after they're adults. They're responsible. What am I responsible for? Giving them sound advice. If they're you're living under your roof, that's a different story, but still, it's only up to a certain extent. They're still responsible adults. If you're an adult child, it's also realizing that, I probably would have wanted better advice from my parents, or guidance, or whatever, resources, but I don't have it. It's still upon me to get it done. And understanding like where you are, developmentally is super, and where your children are developmentally is super important when talking to them. Don't infantilize and treat your children as babies for the rest of their lives. It doesn't do them any good. It doesn't do you any good.
I think Dr. Afshana also talked a little bit about this earlier, when sort of like to have some sort of incentive, and maybe that doesn't apply necessarily to adult children, but there is a way to where they don't feel like they're being criticized, right? Okay, I think she's frozen. Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, it looks like her photo is frozen. But yeah, well, they don't feel that they're criticized. Sometimes it's important to actually say, look, I'm going to tell you what's on my mind, and then you go and do what you want, right? Just make it plain. Look, I'm only telling you what I think is best for you. And if I didn't tell you this, I would be responsible in front of Allah. I'm going to tell you. I'm not saying it to you to critique you. I'm saying it to help you. That, to me, that helps a lot more than leaving things to assumptions, which can be very, very detrimental.
Dr. Afshana, are you able to hear us now better?
I can hear you.
Okay, you were frozen earlier. Okay, slightly cutting off and on. Okay. Yes, okay. All right, awesome. I guess, did you hear the question that was directed?
Sorry about maybe tell me again. I'm not sure what I missed.
Okay. Well, I was just saying how you mentioned earlier about when you talk to your children, you don't do it in a criticizing manner, because they're like, maybe offer some sort of incentive, or saying like, because, yeah. So if you want to just, I guess, say it, or like recap that, or say a little more about it.
Sure. Yeah, not necessarily an incentive, but really starting off approaching them with something that's positive. If we are trying to connect with our children, or for anybody for that matter, if you start with something negative, you immediately put them on the defensive. And once the other person is in the defensive, they are not going to hear anything that you have to say, because their mind is really thinking about ways that they can justify their actions, or justify whatever it is that you just talked about that was negative. So if you really want to be heard,
then starting out with a positive, taking their defenses down and really saying, hey, you know what? I really appreciate this about you, or I know you're this, or whatever it is related to the subject that you want to approach them with. So starting off with positive, engaging with them, and of course, especially if they're adult children, just like Sheikh Joe said, they may not necessarily take into consideration what you have to say, or wholeheartedly follow everything that you want them to do. So understanding that they may make their own decision about it, but when you allow that flexibility, there's more likelihood that they will do what you say. Whereas if you say this is something you have to do, then you kind of stir up that rebellion, and they might decrease the chances that they may have followed it anyways. So approaching them with positivity, have a little bit of a flexibility, and understanding that at the end of the day, they're adults and they're going to make their own choices. Sometimes it's a tough pill to swallow for parents, but that is the reality, and you will increase the chances of your not only connection with them, but also the likelihood that they will actually listen to what you have to say.
Okay, so we are a little bit over 7 o'clock. So I do want to thank you guys, both Dr. Afshana and Sheikh Joe, for joining and discussing these topics with us, which I feel every family can relate to and everyone is experiencing. And like Dr. Afshana mentioned, we are all human and we are experiencing the same things, and we're all going through this pandemic together. So hopefully something that was said has the power to change maybe a day in your life, or the way that you speak to your parents, or parents, maybe the way that you're handling time with your children. Inshallah, something is beneficial to you and your family. Sheikh Joe, if you don't mind, can you end us off with a dua, please?
Sure, as the Prophet ﷺ would end his meetings and his majalis, Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Glory to you, O Allah, and by your praise we seek your forgiveness and we repent to you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless each and every one of us to hear anything good that was said today and to put it to practice, and to become those that gain closeness to Him by gaining closeness to our families and working together for the ultimate prize with His Jannah. Ameen.
Ameen. And again, thank you again to everyone that was watching, and thank you to Sheikh Joe and Dr. Afshana. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.